Hello, everybody, and welcome to AI Inside. I am one of the hosts, Jason Howell, here to talk about the AI that's apparently inside a whole lot of things. We've got many news stories that tell us that today. Joining me, as always, Jeff Jarvis. How you doing, Jeff?
Hey there, boss. How are you?
Great. I'm super excited. We've got some news. We've got Apple in the rundown, which is, sometimes I feel like I have blinders on to Apple because I'm so used to not talking about Apple in my
It's that other
technology
world.
career.
It's that other,
Yeah,
as I say
I
in,
want
in
to change that.
Manhattan, the Upper East Side is a different country. Apple is a different country.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just, for anyone who doesn't know, like I've been on Android and podcasting about Android since almost the beginning of Android. So I've never really owned an Apple device, well, an Apple like smartphone, but I'm running all of this show and all of my computing on Apple devices. It's just the smartphone aspect of things is so lost on me. I just haven't spent much time with it. Have you ever actually owned an iPhone, or have you always been Android?
No, I did back in the day, but I was Android pretty early. And
Yeah.
once I got on This Week in Google,
Yeah, I
I
know.
moved La Vida Google. I saw a story today. It's not an AI story, but an argument that Steve Jobs thought the iPad was going to win and the iPhone won. Not he still won both ways.
Yeah.
There was a moment on Twig in the early days when I reboxed my iPad, so I feel vindicated.
There you go. Good. Well, we are actually going to talk about the iPad
Mhm.
kind of sort of today. That's going to be coming up here in a moment. But real quick, just a reminder, if you are subscribed to this podcast, thank you. If you're where you are subscribed allows you to review, please leave us a review. We want to try and continue to raise awareness about the podcast, spread the word. If you know someone who loves AI, loves tech podcasts, that sort of stuff, tell them about AI Inside and get them subscribed. That would be a huge favor to us. And then, yes, we do have a way for you to support us directly. Patreon.com, slash AI Inside. Actually, that was the wrong lower third there, but AI Inside Show, actually. So patreon.com slash AI Inside Show. Make sure you go to that one. And you can support us directly, like Jason Brady, one of our
Yay!
amazing patrons who supported us from practically the very beginning of the launch of this podcast. And we seriously,
Thank
when we say we could not do this without your support, we could not. This is how we run the show. So we really appreciate y'all being on board. Appreciate you reaching out and telling us how much you support what Jeff and I are doing. And on that end, why don't we start delivering on some promises here? We got a lot of news to talk about. Let's start off with Apple, who held a iPad event yesterday, showed off some AI announcements along with that, specifically the new next-gen M4 chip coming to the iPad Pro. With a focus on AI-related tasks. Tim Millett, who's Apple's vice president of platform architecture, called the M4 an outrageously powerful chip for AI. And, Apple's making more mention of AI because I think the kind of running thing around the AI race in the last couple of years has been, whether accurate or not, that Apple has seemed, of all the big tech companies, to be the laggard when it comes to really embracing and, going fully vocal about, the presence of AI in its devices and its strategy.
Yeah, I responded to Benedict Evans on one of the socials a few minutes ago that he was talking about how Apple's now going to say AI in every presentation, and I said
Right.
For that AI is the new 5G. Remember, we used to make fun of Apple for
Yeah.
saying one presentation was 5G, 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 5G. Now it's
Right.
AI,
Oh,
AI,
yeah. Big
AI,
time.
and it's going to be the same next week with I/O, though they've
Mm-hmm.
been uh, AI obsessed for a long time at Google. Um,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, this is interesting in all kinds of ways. The reason that I did rebox my iPad was because I said it wasn't a very good creation machine in the time.
Mm-hmm. And this was when was this? Early
Oh,
iPad
first
days,
one,
or
first one, yeah.
it was the very first one?
Yeah,
Okay.
so I
Yeah.
got
It's
it, and
changed
then
a lot since then.
it has. And I ended up with Google tablets. I wish I missed my Nexus 7. I loved my Nexus 7. It was pocket sized.
Yeah.
And then phones became that size. So the tablet piece hasn't interested me. But this creation piece with AI is interesting because I wonder
Mhm.
whether the problem with a tablet is you didn't have as many tools as you could muster on a desktop to do all this creation stuff. Now the tools have gotten way different, way better. Plus, you add in the help from AI. I wonder whether it could make the tablet into a powerful creation machine now. Just what I was
Oh,
before.
no question it will. I mean, we've seen on our smartphones, kind of what is kind of to a certain degree table stakes as far as AI functionality in the last year. All the smartphone manufacturers are really doing a lot of similar things, right? They're doing, yes, your generative AI around text and composing messages, helping you change your tone. They're also leaning into the generative AI around image manipulation, and Google's doing really cool things with the perfect shot or the best shot. I can't remember what it's called off the top of my head, but anyways, we're seeing those kind of creative elements, and that is kind of part of the realm in which Apple hasn't been playing in the sandbox so much. And I think part of what this announcement really seems to set the pace for is, all right, the M4 can do a lot of this stuff on device now. We know that Apple is really at least from a publicity and marketing standpoint, really sensitive to the privacy of its users and keeping things out of the cloud as much as possible and on device. And this processor kind of and also this processor debuting on the iPad with WWDC coming up next month. We're probably going to hear a whole lot more as far as how all these things kind of come together, and we're just getting a more clear picture of Apple's AI intentions, their strategy there.
Yeah, I'd just be interested to see what the differences are. With your phone,
Mhm.
you take the picture with the phone, then you want to manipulate it on the phone. You want to
Yeah.
go somewhere, you want to do something, you want to translate something, you want to transcribe something. All of those functions can be aided by uh, local AI on the phone.
Mhm.
Plus, if Google finally gets its way with the sandbox, ad targeting as well.
Right.
On the iPad, again, it's a different modality. And I think Adobe like things, creation in that sense, I can see working really well on an iPad. On
Mhm.
a laptop, you're doing writing,
For
you're not really
sure.
doing that on the iPad. So maybe it's more about music and art and um, design and things like that, where it becomes a helpmate.
I mean, the iPad Pro, with the pencil, with the Apple Pencil and everything for the last handful of years has been such a standards bearer when it comes to art and creativity on the tablet form factor. Samsung also, plays pretty strongly in that space, but I think Apple probably gets the most recognition as far as that's concerned, at least here in the US. And so, yeah, and Adobe has played pretty closely to Apple,
Mhm.
in its mobile devices on, or its mobile apps on those devices as well. So yeah, and we've also, on top of that, we've also seen companies like Adobe really leaning so heavily into integrating generative AI into the tool set. So I think that's exactly what we're going to see in the next, year or two, especially coming to iPads and
To
iOS
transition into the
devices.
next story on the rundown, I think the other
Yeah.
reason that Apple has been less vocal about AI, I won't say they're behind, to be nice to them. Let's say they've been less visible and vocal on AI,
Yeah.
is because AI has been concentrated in servers.
Hmm.
And Apple is not a server company really much. Um, Not the same as Google. But now that this compute power is coming down into the device, now the irony is that Apple has to catch up on the server.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it's true. It's like
So
we don't want to have to, but I guess we have to. This is called Project ACDC. It's dynamite. Um,
So Apple is developing AI chips for data centers,
yeah,
and I think everybody's in a stranglehold with NVIDIA where there's a supply problem,
totally.
and I imagine there's things they want to do. To think about it, Jason, it's so amazing that to me, I'm old enough to remember when Intel made the vast majority of chips, and it was a really complicated task that took such high specialization and such time. And
Hmm.
now how this whole industry has gone, and it's something when we used to have Stacy Higginbotham on, she actually knew about chip making, and I still don't know about it. But it's fascinating how this is spread around. Where on the one hand, you have extremely high efforts like NVIDIA's chips, but you also have Apple and Google, making their own as well. And I think the whole separated fab world makes a difference. I imagine there's a lot of compute help exponentially greater on the design process. So it enables a company like Apple to say, okay, we're going to have our own damn data centers. Take that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and in this case, so the AC/DC, I didn't just throw that out there to get like a rock music reference in there. Apple Chips and Data Center is what it stands for. And they're actually working with TSMC on design and production of these chips. And the focus is more on running AI models rather than training them, which essentially leaves that to the players like NVIDIA primarily.
Well,
So kind of
Apple's
picking
been
their
talking,
lane and sticking to it, it seems like.
right? And Apple's been talking to, I think, both Google and OpenAI. We said last week, right? Microsoft. So I don't think that Apple's going to necessarily create their own models as much as you say, as use them. Yeah.
Yeah, indeed. So maybe this is the turning point for Apple. Maybe, they can pull themselves out of being a little bit of the AI punching bag by probably a small group of people, love to know that they've got something on Apple, and they can jab at them and say, oh, but you were behind here. But I don't think it's Apple. Like, I don't think it takes them very long to catch up if that's needed.
As you talk about this, it's interesting that because I use Chromebooks and because I use Android, I don't have much relationship at all with Apple or Microsoft, by the way. And only recently I finally started using Apple TV Plus. And it's good. It's really good. They have all kinds of good shows on it, and I'm enjoying it. And it just made it clear to me how little of a relationship with Apple I have because I'm not in their hardware ecosystem. And I think in the long run, that's a disadvantage for them. And in an AI world, they've got to figure out how to serve people no matter what platform you're on. And I don't know whether how much that conflicts with their "we own you in our fence" strategy.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, it is a total conflict. I mean, Apple is really, by and large, the last decade and a half of their mobile, strategy has been largely about creating an ecosystem that is self-contained, walled off, some might say, but incredibly powerful when you're within it. It's kind of like if you're willing to hand over, the control to Apple as far as making certain decisions for you, then you stand to benefit because all these things are interconnected and operate so well together. And I guess I would be surprised to see Apple do it, choose a different strategy when it comes to AI outside of, no, we've got our users, we've got the people who will follow us and, will religiously love, and use the things that we create for them. So let's just make this the cushiest, nicest, fluffiest cloud for them that we possibly can.
And certainly, as with search, Google is happy to sell them services. OpenAI are happy to sell them services. Yeah, that's true.
Yes. Yep. Having the right partners is important. Search and AI sounds like right. Sounds like OpenAI is getting into this game. Could possibly happen next week. And there's a few different bits and bobs on this story, potentially competing directly with, like you said, Google Gemini, Microsoft Copilot, Perplexity, which is the one that I tend to use the most often. A user could, according to sources, a user could ask ChatGPT a question and get answers with details pulled from the web, citations included, also possibly some images when appropriate, along with the written responses. The information actually first reported on this back in February. And in the last week, folks have noticed that search.chatgpt.com had before shown a not found message before this weekend, but now that points to chatgpt.com, and that lines up with the fact that OpenAI had scheduled an event for tomorrow, Thursday, I believe, to share some product updates. They've now reportedly moved that to Monday, which happens to be right before Google I/O. So we're at that time of year where everybody's playing strategic chess with all of their major moves, and it all seems to be AI related. So search possibly coming to ChatGPT, search capabilities and integration. What do you think about that? You've mentioned before that you remain unconvinced at the integration of search and AI.
Yeah, I really don't see a solution on the horizon. I could be wrong, and God knows what they're working on in laboratories of the future. But uh, generative AI has no sense of meaning or fact or truth,
Mm.
and let alone being sentient and all that. And so I just don't trust it when it comes to search. I don't trust it with facts at all. I always start. It's the egotistical when search engines came out. We used to search for ourselves.
Mhm.
Now we ask, at least I do, I'll admit it. I asked chats, who am I? And they always get something wrong,
Oh
always.
yeah, for sure, for sure.
And it's not hard because there's bios, and there's Wikipedia, and there's stuff and out there. And there's words that you can see. Like one of them just said, I'm an associate professor. Well, no, I'm a professor now. And I looked at the source and it did have a citation. It wasn't in there. It's just, it's so used to saying professor and associate. It just did that.
Oh,
Right.
interesting. So it's
Um,
so it cited the location that it pulled that information from, but that location actually didn't have that information there.
No, it's my
That's so
university. So my rank
yeah.
is professor,
Oh,
thank God,
interesting.
and not associate. It hasn't been
Yeah.
for quite a number of years. So to associate um, generative AI with search, I just think is risky and dangerous. And those who are saying this is going to kill Google, I don't know, because I think enough people might see that it just doesn't work very well unless they solve problems in ways. There's a lot of discussion about RAG. I always forget what RAG stands for.
We were talking
Of
about that last week, right?
Yeah, limiting it to a set corpus of
Retrieval
information
augmented generation.
generation. Thank you.
Yeah.
Um, but still, it you know, I was just thinking about this, Jason. In a sense, the primary skill that generative AI lacks is the ability to say, "I don't know."
Hmm.
But when it doesn't know anything, it doesn't know what it doesn't know.
Right.
So it
That's
can't
true.
say, "Oh, I better go fill that in. I better go find that." Yeah, and of course, I'm speaking anthropomorphically in all of this. It doesn't
Right.
think, it
Right.
doesn't say just what, but it has no sense because it has no sense of meaning, and it is designed to please us, to give us what we want, no matter what. I will give you the
Mhm.
next word, no matter what. And unless a specific guardrail has been built to say, well, I can't tell you about events now because my data only goes to blank. That's a built-in feature, in essence.
Mhm.
So it's hard for me to see how search is going to work well. Now, clearly, Microsoft is working on this for Bing, and
Right.
OpenAI are going to try to.
Mhm.
Clearly, they want to attack Google, and clearly, Google's nervous. So I could be wrong about all of this, but color me dubious.
Yeah. I mean, I think my interaction with Google's kind of integrated AI search experience, the what was it, the GSE, or I can't remember what they called it
Right.
way back when. My experience with that is, I've continued to keep that activated since I activated it however many months ago, and I don't rely upon it. It's another kind of a nugget of information that I can use and integrate along with everything else that I get inside of a search query. I rarely, if ever, look at that and I'm done. You know what I mean? And like,
No.
okay, I trust what I read right here. But that's kind of my own personal approach to using these AI systems in general around research and understanding different topics. Is I rarely, if ever, get an answer and go, okay, I got what I'm looking for. I'm done. I will almost always click on the citation and do exactly what you did, which I think is, it's there for a reason to be sure. And I would say in my experience with like Perplexity, and then like I said, the Google Gemini kind of integrated search AI capabilities, is that they've gotten a lot better. Are they perfect? No. And I don't know
Mhm.
that there is such a thing as perfection when we're talking about AI and information. But I have noticed that they've gotten better, that I find less wrong the more that I use them.
Yeah, and I can see how it can be fine tuned to that effect. And
Yeah.
as you're talking, it occurs to me that Google didn't have to be perfect. All Google had to do was to give you results,
Mm.
and those were
Yeah.
elsewhere. And then, of course, it tried to give you answers, but it tried to do that in ways that were fairly reliable. Wikipedia.
Mhm. Mhm.
But we're old enough, each of us, to remember that when the early days of Wikipedia, you were told never stop there, always go to the next level,
Yeah.
only use it as a
Yeah.
beginning. Yeah, there's times when it'll come up for me on the side, and I want to remember something, or I want to explain something. I'll say, "Oh yeah, that's right. That's what I was looking for. That's fine."
Mm.
But a
Mhm.
fact, nah. I just
Yeah.
don't think it's going to ever be reliable in its present form. Which again goes to the issue of the next generation of AI is going to be agentic, and if it doesn't get things right for you, if it doesn't get you to the right city when you ask it for a plane reservation, you're not
Oh
going to use
boy.
it.
Yeah.
So I think there's a
Absolutely.
my guess is that the generative AI versions we see right now, the large language models we see right now, are an evolutionary step, and it's going to take some next big step to a new kind of model of how these systems work before
Mhm.
we're going to see them working in areas like agents and search and writing news.
Yeah. Yeah, working to the point to where people, by and large can just outright trust that, when you want that ticket to that place, you're going to get to the place you want to go. You're going to actually, save some money in the process. It's going to be the shortest distance, the shortest route, and all these variables that right now, man, I wouldn't trust an AI to do that for me. No way in heck.
No.
Absolutely not. But I can look forward and see that happening at some point. I do kind of believe that at some point we will get to a point to where these things are more trustworthy than they are right now. And I think it will always be a matter of individual kind of perception or kind of gut feeling or experience that tells each one of us what our specific level of trust is as far as integrating or interacting with these services. We'll all have a different sense of that, in other words.
That's true, and I think the other interesting thing, which leads right into what this is the genius of Jason when he does does the rundown for both of us. It flows from one idea to the next. I think this flows into the next idea, which is
Yeah.
the web being filled with not only disinformation but AI generated crap. And so, if we expect, even if OpenAI got really good at search, more and more it, like Google, is searching through crap.
Yeah.
And so one of the challenges here is to determine what is wrong, not only wrong, but artificially generated and thus less reliable. And
For
that's a
sure.
that's a challenge on both ends. In other words, the LLM itself needs to have better functionality to understand where to understand whether there's truth to something, and
Mhm.
then the sources that it goes to are going to get worse and worse and worse, and the web's going to degenerate, and that's going to only amplify this challenge, which
Mhm.
leads to the next story.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, OpenAI working on a tool to detect deepfake imagery. They're sharing this tool with a small group of disinformation researchers for testing out the results. And this specific tool only works on OpenAI's image generation service, the DALL-E 3. So this isn't a tool that you could apply to anything and everything that's generated online. It is specific to their service, and that is one question that I have: is it truly possible to really create something that can, by and large, make the determination on anything and everything practically? But I mean, even in this case, they're working on their own service. They say, that it correctly spots 98.8% of DALL-E 3 images and 99.5% of real images. So we're talking about like a, 0.5% to a little more than 1% kind of fluctuation on either of these stats, which sounds small, but it's the whole, it's all about scale, right? And 1% of a ginormous number is a ginormous number of, is billions of images that make it through, even at that rate, and are misidentified or misdetected. And, that question always comes back to, like, is that reliable enough? And, I mean, 1% sounds great, but billions of images, like, I don't know. I don't think it is.
Well, what struck me about this is that it's OpenAI trying to detect fakes made by OpenAI, and by
Yeah.
fakes I just mean images made by. Let's call it that
Yeah.
way. Um, that would strike me as something that should be easy. They should be able to give themselves a signal that they can detect on
They
their
are.
own images.
They are working on that. OpenAI is working on a watermarking technology that they say will be difficult to remove. But again, difficult / impossible. And that kind of ties in with my question right at the top of this story was, is it only easy enough, or, well, that's the wrong way to phrase it. Like, are these companies going to have an easier time identifying only the misinformation or the deep fakes or whatever that are created through their own systems versus wider than that? And I mean, I don't know the answer to that question. I'm sure there are patterns and things that probably pop up regardless of the system you're using. But I mean, at the end of the day, there is no certainty on this. It's not a 100% thing.
Right. Even if OpenAI cannot guarantee that OpenAI can recognize the images that OpenAI makes, then when you get past that, it's tough. It would be, I wish that the researchers who had access to this could put it against others' images. Because I would imagine it just falls completely apart, that there's something OpenAI put in there. Watermarking is generally rejected as a solution in the long run, because even though they always say you can't get around it, you can get around it. And if it's really well hidden, somebody will figure it out and figure out how to get rid of it. Once you know where it is,
there's
a
certain pattern, that eventually is somewhat perceptible by people who look into this long enough. Yeah, these things never last forever, that's for sure.
Yeah. And in a way, the funny thing is these companies are creating, I mean, I don't want to say they're creating a problem, because not most everything everybody's making is interesting for fun, for good use, not used for the purposes of deepfake, disinformation, and fooling the world. So I don't want to say that everything made by these image generators is bad. It's not. In fact, the image generator does no good from bad. It's just making an image, doing what it's told. How someone asks for it and how they use it is the issue. It's the user and the behavior that matters, not the content itself. And whenever you try to concentrate on the content itself, you're going to get fooled.
Yeah.
And this is why, to go to the next story, there's an interesting thing happening here where people are falling over themselves to try to get people to label their own AI. So on the one hand, this is from Axios, Hollywood's AI disclosure dilemma. They're being told or expected to disclose when they use AI. Well, some of me says, well, they've had CGI for ages, and they've used
we're
they've
on
had
the same page on
Photoshop
this one.
for ages.
We're on the same page.
They've had what do you call it when you auto-tune?
Auto-tune.
Ages.
Yeah.
Right? There's tons and tons of tools, but AI has become this scare word that, if you use AI, you have to disclose it. But if you use CGI, you don't. It's kind of ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, and I think it also complicating the situation is, all of the writer strikes and everything that happened in Hollywood last year, which really, kind of got everybody, up in arms against this AI threat that's closing in fast on Hollywood jobs. And so this kind of like plays into that argument, is like, see, Hollywood's already integrating. But I mean, I'm telling you, like, and Megan Maroney, hello, Megan, wrote this article for Axios. She links to a couple of examples, one of them being True Detective, which back in January, people who were watching True Detective on HBO, Night Country, I guess is the sub name for it, noticed that in the background are these posters. And when you look closely at the post, let me pull this up. I realize I'm not showing it for video viewers. These posters in the background, that when you start to really kind of look at them a little bit closer, if possible, you start to see true telltale signs of AI generation. Metal US tour, some of the faces, I suppose, look a little weird. It is off in the distance, but anyways, some of this looks generative AI to it, sure. But like when I see that, I'm kind of like, well, if they didn't make it with generative AI, they would have made it with Photoshop, or they would have made it with After Effects, or like, I really don't care how they made that fake poster that's hanging up on the wall. Like, I don't care. Make it with whatever you want. It's like it's a prop.
And are we really trying to fool people by doing that? Hollywood is all made up. It's the whole point of it.
Totally. It absolutely is.
But then the next story Megan has is that recognizing the heat that's going to come upon them, big tech companies are requiring users to label AI. So, well, we can't really detect it. So instead, we're going to require it be labeled by you if you put it up, and if you don't, then we're going to blame you. So there's going to be this tail chasing going on. Is it real, or is it Memorex, or is it OpenAI? And I think we're going to have to admit very soon that the generalized answer is always going to have to be, I don't know. And it's like a deep fake of a Rembrandt done with brushes. It's if you're going to counterfeit something, then provenance is the only answer. And you go back to a human being you trust,
right,
to say that this was made in this way, it was acquired in this way, I verify that it is. And I think that's going to require a lot of expense and effort, but it's also going to enable, I think, new business models, authentication, and trustworthy sources of things and trustworthy creators of things. And it happened in print. Sorry, going to my Gutenberg moment. Those of you who know me, drink Gutenberg parenthesis on sale now at gutenbergparenthesis.com.
There you go.
The same thing happened with print, where print was unreliable at first because you didn't know where it was made. Anybody could make it. Then the institutions of editing and publishing came along to create sources. Oh, yes, this came from Cambridge University Press. Then I know it's for real. That what mattered more than the medium or the form or any clue within it. And I think we're going to find ourselves in the same case across the entire web and information ecosystem, which is going to be an expensive and weird transition because now there's just tons of stuff out there. And we can get there's I put another story up in the rundown 1 minute before we got on, so you didn't even have a chance to read it. And Jason actually likes to read these things and know what he's talking about before. So I'm going to jump this on him. Futurism has a really good story, which I didn't finish reading either, but meet Advon, the AI-powered content monster infecting the media industry. So this is the company that evidently did the Sports Illustrated fake writers, and the lead is somebody who used to be hired to write this crap to put on the web, the content factories. Then the next job the person had was to edit the crap that was made by AI to train the AI, and then he lost his job. And so now the web is going to be filled and overfilled with this crap made by AI, going to make the web less useful, going to make search less useful, I think going to make search more difficult. And so the answer is going to have to be, I think, going back to creating institutions of authenticity and authority. And we don't have them now. We don't have anybody that can deal with the scale of this challenge. And it's not going to be one size fits all.
No.
So it's going to be a really interesting challenge. Yeah.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
Not one size fits all, because I think the question that, that comes up for me with, the conversations that we've had as far as noting provenance and when something is generated, and the importance of that when it's related to something like, journalism and so, where facts do matter, compared to fake poster hanging on the wall in the back of an episode of an HBO show. Like, there are two very different things in my mind. Like, one, yes, I want to know disclosure because it's critical to, to so many things. And the other, it's like, I really don't care how that was created. But
yeah,
I like how that actor, performed in that scene. That was pretty captivating.
Right.
It's just a different thing altogether in my mind.
When it comes to just this idea of content, which I argue in the Gutenberg parenthesis on sale now, is commodified by AI. Right.
Yeah.
And we thought we were filling the world with something, and now that's over. So I think for AI to just make content, it made me a song and I like the song, I think we're going to say okay to that. But anything requiring decisions, right? Medicine, education, business decisions, even personal commerce decisions, financial decisions, that's the case where you're going to have to know, where did this come from? How do they do it? Do I trust them? What's their track record? And we're very early days and we don't have the structures. Is that regulation? I think there'll be a reflex to try to do that, but it's going to go too fast and be too big for regulators. And so it's going to be about, I guess, branding and reputation.
Yeah. Well, Speaking of reputation, after a quick pause here, we're going to talk about Microsoft's reputation in AI because they've got some new projects that they're working on. Microsoft prepping a new LLM named MAI1. Is it My1? Sure, why not? Let's just call it that. Led by Mustafa Suleyman, who you may remember, former Google DeepMind co-founder, also Inflection founder. Big news. I think it was like last month or the month before that he and much of the Inflection staff was hired off by Microsoft. This model in particular is not carried over from the Inflection acquisition, but could possibly use some of the data, the training data from that company's work. And, we've already talked about Google I/O. We've talked about Apple's WWDC. Yes, now we've got Microsoft Build also happening next month. So, you can guess that some of this is going to be shown to some capacity next month at the event. And this, kind of ties into a story that I think we talked about either last week or the week before, how Microsoft had a smaller model, the Phi 1 mini model, and that was unveiled last month at some point. This one in particular, much larger. So the Phi 3 mini, 3.8 billion parameters. This one, 500 billion parameters. Not quite the something trillion parameters that OpenAI touts for ChatGPT, the latest ChatGPT. But there you go. They're filling in the spaces with their larger and smaller models, and this is definitely the larger one.
Yeah, and it's interesting that Microsoft is hedging its bets. I think that the truth of it is, so Microsoft was seen as jumping ahead in AI because of the relationship with OpenAI. The truth is, Google was way ahead of AI. Google was doing it for years, implementing it in all of its products, was using it heavily, and then Microsoft managed to do a leapfrog thanks to OpenAI. But that made them dependent upon OpenAI. And as we learned with the whole Sam Altman mishigas, that's a vulnerable position to be in. So it makes sense that they got Suleiman. It makes sense that they're trying to build their own models and find their own way here.
Yeah, as a lot of the companies are trying to, kind of lay their stake in the ground and have that for themselves too. And you put in an article that ties in so perfectly with this. Gary Marcus, who we hope to bring onto the show sometime this summer. We're kind of in the conversation right now, so I'm really hoping that happens. That's all about the complicated relationship between Microsoft and OpenAI, and it does a really great job of just spelling out like how at one point it seemed like they needed each other, and that may still be the case, but also there's so many competing efforts happening within both of these companies that it really creates a very bumpy road for the long-term kind of partnership, or at least understanding like what are the real intentions here, who is your competition and who isn't, based on these relationships. What did you think about this? You were the one that put this in here.
Yeah, I thought it was Gary is a always good skeptical view of AI and the players. He asks the questions. He's also smart-assed, which makes it fun to read, and he goads them. He pushes them. All the companies, I think, fairly equally. He's an AI person himself. He knows AI, but he's tough. One thing that struck me here too, Jason, was not just the who has the technology and who's building the technology and who do we depend upon, but also the chart that he has up on the screen here for the corporate structure of OpenAI. And for those of you listening, it's hard to describe.
Yeah.
But it starts at the top where the OpenAI board of directors controls OpenAI Inc., the nonprofit, which fully owns OpenAI GP LLC, which fully controls OpenAI Holdings LLC, which is partially owned by investors and employees. It itself is the majority owner in OpenAI Global LLC, the capped for-profit company, which is the one we hear, in which Microsoft is a minority owner.
Right.
And if you try to figure out there, well, who owns a percentage of that? Impossible. Absolutely impossible. Who controls it? Impossible. Especially when you look at the weird governance of OpenAI Inc., the nonprofit. So that's so complicated too. I've got to believe the Microsoft board of directors is saying, put aside the Sam Altman drama and all of that stuff. Put aside even my beloved topic of TESCREAL and the insanity that brings to this discussion. Just look at this corporate structure. And they're going to say, and you're putting our AI strategy on the basis of this outside entity? No, no. So I've got to believe that in the long run, OpenAI just becomes a supplier, but it in turn can't depend upon just one customer, Microsoft.
Hmm.
So it's got to decide. It's interesting, Jason. I saw this in media over the years. The inevitable conflict of whether you are B2B or B2C.
Mm-hmm.
If you are B2B, then you serve your customers. You do not get in the way of them. You let them succeed. You do not compete with them. You do not have a B2C brand. Well, OpenAI and all of these companies are B2B because they want to sell to each other. That's where the real money is. But they're also trying to build B2C brands.
Yes, indeed. Yeah,
and it's going to be, I think, really interesting and really difficult to see where all this lands. Not that there's a lot, not that OpenAI is making a fortune from $20 a month from people. It's not. It's making it elsewhere. Nonetheless, it's basically competing with Microsoft in that sense. And if it goes into search, then it loses the potential of Google as a customer on the B2B level.
Yeah, it's very fragile and delicate with how they're developing out these things and the relationships that already exist, coupled with the products that they're also building because they all want to be there. And yeah, it gets messy really fast.
It really does, which makes me come back. And I think the dark horse in all of this is Meta, because they're open sourcing. They're not open sourced everything, but open sourcing and doing small models and doing interesting things where they put their best model out for free at meta.ai. So they're undercutting everybody who's trying to charge $20 a month. They're putting their models out so people could use them as open source. That undercuts everybody. And so I think you could find yourself in a weird position of commodification, or it's just another plain old bubble like we had in 2000, where huge amounts of money went into it. The revenue just simply, and the user case is simply not there yet. And it will be, but not in time for that payoff to happen. So this is why it's really fascinating to look at this one relationship as one little piece in a very complicated family.
Yeah, indeed. Very great article. And really interesting kind of way to tie all the pieces together by Gary Marcus. So I'm really happy you put that in there. I had missed that one. I had not missed the next story though, because I had read this and I was like, oh, we got to talk about this on AI Inside. The Verge has an article that focuses on kids who seek companionship with AI chatbots. And so it, it checks in on how teenagers are using AI chatbots in their kind of lives for things like friendship, emotional support, using it to, as like a safe place to vent their frustrations, explore fantasies, practice social skills. And they also note, the teens who are using these also say, there's no judgment tied to these conversations. These are conversations that I can have and not be judged along the way I might be if I was to bring any of this to the real world. They're using platforms like character.ai. One bot that comes up continuously through the article is the psychologist bot on Character AI. But Character AI is a whole platform with, where people can create bots of all different types. And of course, with something like this, when it has to do with kids, it has to do with emerging technology like artificial intelligence. That gets experts worried about like what's happening to our children, addiction, how you transition from the cues and the social clues that you learn about in conversing with a bot, and how you transform from that experience into taking that out into the real world and real life interactions. And yeah, it's just an interesting article that looks at something which I imagine is the interaction and the comfort in communicating with chatbots, I think that doesn't lessen over time. I think that only increases over time because these bots are going to get better at serving, the people who use them like this. And so what I found really interesting about it, and then I'm curious to hear your take, is that, always the younger generations are open to more things than the older generations that are current to now. And this is one of those examples, right? This could be, the rock and roll or whatever is like, oh, well, AI is just a thing. And I'm growing up and I don't have a lifetime of experience and ethical whatever to look at this thing and be wary or concerned or anything. I just see it as this thing that is now, that is cool, and I'm going to use it, dang it. And how does that serve them as they grow older with this technology becoming more and more pervasive over time? What are your thoughts? That was a lot.
First off, I mean, the company that Mustafa Suleiman left was Inflection. And Inflection's model, backed by Reid Hoffman, was to create Pi, which was supposed to be a personal AI, an AI that got to know you, an AI that would be used for all of these kinds of functions. I don't know what happens to Pi in the long run. It's not gone. How much development will go into it, I don't know. And there's other competitors like this. That's one thought, is I think there is a business here. The other thought is, and I put this in parentheses as my own smartass remark, I'm counting down to the moral panic over this. Oh my God, teens are talking to a machine. Oh my God, they can be manipulated because they're all stupid. We were smart, but they're stupid.
Right, exactly.
Say, right?
We were okay with our horrible decisions, with our dumb decisions, but they will not be.
Oh no,
we know better.
Not, yeah. And they're not talking to real people. I bet Jonathan Haidt, the moral panickers, is already writing about the perils of AI, having moved on, like Tristan Harris, from the perils of social media. It's a next peril. Now, I said this on social media, and a professor I respect greatly, and I said, well, where's the moral panic here? And I said, no, I'm not saying it's there yet. I'm predicting that it's going to be. It's the next video games. It's the next comic books. It's the next Nickelodeon.
The next rock and roll.
Because I think, as you say, Jason, it's really important, is that young people will experiment with things. That's what youth is about.
Yep.
And they experiment with the world that is before them. And this wasn't before us in our youth, but it is before them now. And so, of course, they're going to experiment with it. They're going to try these things. And it's cool. And, yes, if the Chinese government ends up doing this and they can brainwash young people, are there perils potentially? Yes. What it will mean is that if this is known as a behavior, I think there'll be two reactions in a regulatory view. One, as is happening right now in the UK with Ofcom, is they're trying to say to social media around algorithms, its own form of AI, that they have to do age verification and that kind of stuff. So I think there'll be a reflexive effort to say you can't use AI under a certain age, which of course won't work. The other thing that people are going to try to do is to create guardrails. And certainly, if people are going to look at self-harm of any definition and get answers for that through AI, that's a case where it's a behavior is going to happen. And so you can build a guardrail against it. That guardrail will not be foolproof because people will figure out how to jailbreak it. But companies should, even though I think guardrails are generally futile, I would agree that companies should morally, ethically, and regulatorily be required to try their best to not have it feed self-harm or of any form here. But once young people come in, it's going to raise all kinds of complications, all kinds of media panic. And so I think this is one we'll come back to. I'll bet we'll come back in about 3 months and we'll say, remember 3 months ago when we said people are going to panic? They're already panicking.
Yeah, almost certainly. And when I was reading through this too, like something that struck me is it never sounded to me like the teens that were referenced in the article ever felt like they were actually talking to someone real. Like they
knew,
they understood the realm in which they are playing here. Now there was one teen who said, I will plainly admit it, like I'm addicted to these things. I'm using them all the time. They reference someone using it for like 10 hours or something like that. So, but my point being, like, they aren't stupid. Like they know kind of the the dimension in which these things exist, and they've found a use for them that is helpful in some way, shape, or form to
Right.
their, teenage years. In a certain sense, it really reminded me of Eliza, right? Like,
Oh, yeah.
way back when playing Eliza, and granted, it was not nearly as capable as these chatbots are now, but it's really a role-playing game. At the end of the day, that's what we're talking about here. But you're right. It does have the potential to serve potentially very damaging information. And I think these companies do need to do what they can to address that and, lessen that. Like you said, not eliminate it because they won't, not because they don't want to, but because it's next to impossible to do that. But they do have a responsibility there, I think.
So let me ask you a question, because I'm not a gamer at all.
Yeah.
I just don't like games. Because I don't like losing. I guess that's what it is. Have you seen any good games built on top of generative AI yet, or is the fact that it's not, because it would seem to be, I'm going off what you just said. It's like the old you're in the room with the wizards farm. What do you do?
Zork,
right?
the word games. Yeah, absolutely. No, that's
Right.
another
It's
correlation
perfect.
that I
The
drew.
problem we talked about this last week, that it doesn't remember you from one to the next. It doesn't hold state. But if it did hold state, and ChatGPT says it will, it's really fascinating to imagine how a kid could invent their own game.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, I was a gamer way back when. At least a decade and a half to 2 decades now, I would not consider myself a gamer outside of, just kind of playing here and there random games that come along and everything. I'm sure there are games that exist around generative AI. I'm not aware of what they are, but I would love to know. And if anyone watching or listening does know, contact at aiinside.show, send us an email and let us know. And if there is something, I'd love to check it out and, kind of check back in on the show to kind of see like, what does that look like? I do, if that doesn't exist, I'd be really surprised if it doesn't at this point. It's going to, and I'm curious to know, like, what does that look like? Yeah.
This is why this show is so fun. You're just trying to think of what's possible, what's coming out there.
Yes, totally. Two more things here, two more stories, both of them very interesting about kind of along the AI taking our jobs kind of beat, I suppose. Wall Street Journal on the first story has an article that focuses on the changing landscape for stock photographers in light of generative AI. And something that I hadn't really connected the dots on before, but they mentioned that digital cameras, when they came along, the stock photography industry was in shambles, was because now suddenly, that bar had been lowered and everybody had access to high quality imagery and in a digital sense, and they could just shoot their own, content instead of hiring somebody else. But the stock photographers that survived, that are around today, really had to kind of like figure their way through that challenge and kind of change what they did to form around this new reality. And now they're faced with a new challenge, which is that, we can very easily just go onto a site and create the image ourselves through the use of words, as opposed to licensing out images that are already shot. And I think also on top of that, stock library companies, as we've talked about in previous episodes, are taking their vast, proprietary kind of licensed imagery that's in the database and training their own generative AI models so that they can offer this as a service too. And so it's really putting a lot of pressure on stock imagery photographers, which is unsurprising, to be honest, but
it is
nonetheless interesting to read about.
The interesting thing is that in the timing here, what happened as well was that when the web came along, I say this whenever I'm at a journalism conference, I did it a week ago, where if you go back 40 years in newspapers, maybe 10% of articles were illustrated. Now, absolutely everything you put online has to have an illustration with it. So on the one hand, it created a boom market for stock photography that compensated in part for the loss of business by going to digital and new competition, but new competition and a new market. Now we come to AI coming into this. Now I think it is going to be disastrous for stock photographers, though It's hard to imagine AI as it stands today getting the nuance of everybody's favorite meme. Um, the girlfriend is appalled when the guy is looking enviously at the woman. Right.
Yeah.
Jason, for those of you on audio, just played the clip.
Sorry, I did my best impression, but I can just
And
for video viewers, I can just show the picture instead.
yes,
There you go.
then there's the imitation of
Yeah.
the pissed off girlfriend.
Yeah. Right.
Anyway, uh, there's nuance to facial expression there. There's an
Yeah.
understanding of emotion there. There's humor there. There's all kinds of things built into that photo, and it's hard for me to imagine the best prompt being able to create that photo.
Yeah.
However, if all you need is a new way to say person working at desk, pas de problème, you're going to be able to do it.
Yeah.
This reminds me of one of my favorite stories, and I tell it in, sorry for the third plug already, I tell it in the Gutenberg parenthesis, page 124, for those of you following along.
Wow. So specific.
Well, thank you for search. I looked at the index and they didn't index this, so I had to search for it. In 1901, the New York Times fretted about the fate of illustrators with improvements in camera work. The average illustrator is looking on improvements in camera work with consternation, said the Times. They compared two news events. When Lincoln was shot in 1865, Harper's Weekly sent all of its artists to Washington by train to draw locations and people. And by the time they arrived, he was dead. They rushed back to the train in New York, drawing on the way and then redrawing everything, cutting the engravings onto the blocks so it could get out with illustrations. A full page would take more than a day of work to just engrave it. They put out an extra edition of Harper's 4 days after the event, which was phenomenal. I mean, think about our time sense today. So years later, the Times said a magazine editor on deadline would send artists to the scene of news and have them sketch their illustrations. Then get this, they would telegraph back a description of their illustration to an illustrator in New York who would redraw the illustration.
The prompt engineering.
Bingo. And then what happened was when President McKinley was shot in 1901, Collier's telegraphed orders to photographers on the scene who managed to physically rush their images back to New York within 14 hours. 2 hours later, the pictures were ready to print because you didn't have to engrave the old way. The Times estimated Collier's extra edition cost a tenth of Harper's and was so far ahead of the old Time Extra that there was simply no comparison. What happened to all the unemployed artists, said the Times? Most of them have gone higher up, as in to heaven. Others took to illustrating advertisements or fiction. So we've been here plenty before, which is, and even if you go back, I'm sorry, to Gutenberg, it was not just a revolution of print, of text, it was a revolution of images. Now you could replicate images. You could show how something looked. You could have something that was accurate. It wasn't redraw. Scribes didn't redraw everything. They just rewrote. Now with printing and engraving, images became important. So that alone is a fascinating history to me. And so now you come in with AI able to make images on its own. Of course, it's going to cause another revolution. There are tons of uses. The simple stock photo, but also I can't draw, but now I can illustrate what I want to say.
Yeah.
And I think that puts power in people's hands. So yes, I feel bad for photographers. I do. We still teach photography at journalism school, and we still should, but a lot of this is going to go away.
Yeah. It's going to be interesting. Well, and, they point out in the article also, like, and I think this is true, with generative AI music and other creative output, imagery, generated images and stuff, is yes, these systems can do so much, and it's interesting through the perspective of 2 years ago this seemed like science fiction to the quality that it's doing it now. That's really fascinating. But there is also on the other side of that still the desire for the human touch, still the desire for the nuance that a human can bring to this thing. And whether we can look at an image and immediately tell that was created by a computer versus a human or not, once we know, I think there's something to the fact that when we know that that was created by a human, that connects us to our own humanity. And I think there's a certain layer of respect, or will continue to be a certain layer of respect that we pay to something along those lines that maybe we don't pay to something that's created with a generative AI. And that just kind of tells me that there will always be the need, the desire, the want for the human created artistic thing, even in a world where we can just write some words on a screen and come up with something to compete with it.
Yep. It's but it's fascinating times.
Yeah. And then finally, I put this in here, even though it's not current news, but I hadn't realized this news story. And you have read audiobooks in your time, because you have written some books and then you have been the narrator for audiobooks. So this is a little bit of old news, but it ties into this. Back in November 2023, Amazon announced the Kindle Direct publishing for audiobooks, and it was essentially an opportunity or an option for authors to sample an AI voice and then have that voice read their book into audiobook form if it didn't exist already, and then put that for sale on Amazon. It was invite only at the time. Turns out now there are more than 40,000 virtual voice audiobooks on Audible right now. So I imagine, many of those, if not all of those, well, it says narrated by virtual voice. So I think these are just all the books that, well, some of them are not narrated by Adam Lofbaum, virtual voice. So this isn't a perfect search, but anyways, there's a heck of a lot of audiobooks that are narrated by the virtual voice. And then last month, HarperCollins publishers struck a deal with 11 Labs to go through its back catalog and make audiobooks using 11 Labs AI voice models. Some of the things that hadn't been put into audiobook format so far. So we now have audiobook narration threatened by AI voices. And I'm just kind of curious, from your perspective, like, you've gone through the process of doing this narration. I can't imagine it's easy, but I can imagine that a lot of people, like, this is, again, this is their livelihood. And this is a seemingly capable replacement for that. What's your perspective?
You may be amazed, considering what a mush-mouthed fast talker I am, that I can even do it. And it's the poor producer who has to say, Jeff, could you take that again a little slower? You
Right.
muffed up that word. Can you do that again? And it's hard work.
Oh,
Good
yeah.
work parenthesis took 3 full days, and you're exhausted.
That
The
sounds
poor guy, the
brutal.
producer, can't just look around the room. The producer has to check. Oh, no, sorry, you said the when you should have said and you go back. And so it is expensive to produce. I didn't get paid extra for it because it's my book and I wanted to do it. And I had approved them that I could do it by having done, I think, 4 books by now. So I understand on the cost side why the publishers will be happy with this. And I also understand on the reader side why, on the one hand, I think this could be awful, because I want to hear authors with their own. I prefer an author-read book generally. Some authors are really bad.
I do too. I usually
but
do
generally
too.
I like that.
Sometimes you get that narration and it's like, okay, you probably should have had someone else come in here.
And then there's some that are just phenomenal performances. I just listened to James by Percival Everett, and the performance of it, because everything about that is the accents and the what am I trying to say? The dialogue, the emotion, but also the dialect. That's what I want, because that's the whole point of the book, is that the dialect of an enslaved person was put on by Jim in Huckleberry Finn to make the white slave owners comfortable. And that's the conceit of the book. It's a brilliant conceit, brilliantly done. No AI could ever read that book. Ever. However, in a way, I think this is, as my West Virginia father would say, bass backwards. Because what I would want in this case as a reader, there's so many books that my rule is that if I need to read it for research and I need to underline it, I read it in print. But if it's for pleasure or just interest, then I like to listen to it because I've got time to do that. That's how I fill time alongside podcasts, folks, of course. But I'm frustrated that there are all these books that aren't in audio.
Yes.
Now, of
Me too.
course, on Kindle, you could get it to read to you. So this has been around for quite a while, but you wouldn't buy that separately. It was the Kindle. So to
Mm-hmm.
me, the
Mm-hmm.
question becomes, Jason, whether this is a supply or demand
Hmm.
technology, right?
Mm-hmm.
So now, in a sense, it was before a demand side, in the sense that your Kindle could read to you, but it wasn't very good. Now they're turning into a supply side. Oh, we can make money because we can make it sound like a real audiobook rather than that Kindle crap. But what if the book that I want, an academic book, isn't in audio? Could I get this quality of audio on it? And as an author, would that author say, well, no, I did a really crappy job
Mm-hmm.
of reading that book, and I don't want that out there with my book. So there's all kinds of interesting plays in this and how this works.
Yeah, it's really interesting to me too, because there I have my preference for reading books. I just, I'm not a huge fan of sitting down with a book and staring at it. I get tired really easily when I start reading a book. And I don't know what that means. There's probably a name for it. Who that knows? But I would much prefer to listen to it. I stay far more engaged and everything. But there are just certain books that just don't exist
Yeah,
in
no.
audiobook form. And so I'll pick them up and, I never finish them. And so the user in me would love this because something's better than nothing, right? Like
Yes,
it
exactly.
existing in audio form is like this, as imperfect as it may be, would be better than it not existing in audio form at all. And yeah, another thing that kind of ties into this that I just had this morning, I had to do a lot of driving around with my kids and everything. And I was like, well, why don't I put this time to use? Like, let me go on YouTube and find like an AI news channel. Like, tell me some AI news, because maybe I missed some stories for today's show, that I can, when I get home, I can slot them in. And it turned out the one that I found, I wish I could remember the name of the channel. I started playing it, and it was about 2 minutes in where I was like, this is not a real voice. This is an AI generated, like it was a faceless YouTube channel. It was talking, about an AI story. I think it was the Microsoft story actually. And about it took me 2 full minutes for me to go, oh, wait a minute. This isn't actually someone narrating this. I mean, it's really well done because it took me 2 minutes and I feel like my
Right.
radar is pretty spot on. But what it made me realize is there's a lot of people that would come across that content and be immediately revolted or reject it outright because, well, that's not a real person reading the news. Like, why would I choose to do that? But to a certain degree, I was kind of like, well, yeah, but would I prefer there to be a human kind of, reading this news and sharing commentary? Yes, I would. But this was convincing enough and it was interesting enough. And to a certain degree, it was filling a need that I had in the time, which was I want to know a little bit about AI news right now, and I can't read it. I can only listen to it.
Yes.
And so it was fine. And I was okay with it in that moment. So I think this kind of plays into that too.
Watch out. One of the stories I don't think I put in our rundown is that Elon Musk is talking about how he's going to create an AI-based news service out of what's on X and what's
Oh
in his
boy.
fevered brain. Yeah, and I just dread that. I think that's going to be awful.
Yeah.
I had something else in front of the comments, so I didn't see them. So my apologies. So first, I want to thank Tay Quartermain for two things. One, thank you very much for your tip, and second, another kind of
Oh,
tip here where he
thank you,
tells us that
Tay.
an AI game does exist, AI Dungeon. So
AI Dungeon. Okay.
I'm going there now, where you can play for free and enter your character's name, Jason. Um,
Oh boy.
and
Yeah,
so
which
it
I don't
gives
have
you
your
a
screen. So it's just for anyone watching.
You can't
Like,
see, but if you
why
go
aren't
to
you showing it?
AI,
Yeah, I will show it.
play.aidungeon.com,
Oh,
um,
okay.
and so I asked for a fantasy game and put in the name of the character. You are Jason, a fairy in the kingdom of Larion. You live in
All
a
right.
fairy realm hidden under a grassy hill under the castle. Your skin is a light tinge of blue. That only happens to me when my camera goes off. Your wings sparkle in the sunlight, and you are very small and good at hiding, and on and on and on. So you can well imagine that. Thanks, Tay. This is great,
Yeah, this is great.
and you can see exactly how AI could remake this in all kinds of ways, and it's infinite games.
Indeed. Yeah, kind of create wow. In the future, we'll have game studios creating games, and we'll have more of this, I imagine, where it's just like the game that I've always, my mind is kind of blown right now, because I remember when I was younger having ideas, being so into video games and having ideas for games, but having no idea whatsoever how to create it. And, this is very similar to the paradigm that we were talking about so often right now, which is I'm not an artist, but now I can create images. I'm not a musician, but now I can create music. I'm not a game designer, but I can have an idea for a game, plug it in there and come up with something. And maybe over time that something becomes something really cool and cultivated. And that's a really eye-opening moment.
And deepfakes don't matter because it's fantasy.
Yeah, it's fantasy. It's game.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Interesting.
thank you, Tay, and thank you everybody in the comments. Really glad for your input in the show.
Indeed. Thank you so much for being here, everybody. Thank you, Jeff, for a fantastic show. This was a lot of fun. I knew we were going to have fun with the stories this week because there was so much good stuff.
We went long, but there was a lot to talk about.
That's okay. Gutenberg.com for folks who want to kind of check in on your books and the work
that magazine there with discount codes. Thank you very much.
There you go. Thank you, Jeff. This show, AI Inside, records live every Wednesday at 11 a.m. Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern. We do this on the Techsploder YouTube channel, which is, I had renamed my YouTube channel a couple of weeks ago. So go to youtube.com/@Techsploder. When we've got a live show coming up and we're doing a live recording, you'll see a little kind of placeholder for that live event, and you can actually have it remind you if you want to be here live while we do the show. But if you don't want to watch live or even use YouTube, that doesn't matter. It's totally fine. We publish the show to the podcast feed later in the day, which you can get to all of the links to the various different audio podcast subscription ways at aiinside.show. Please be sure to like, rate, review, and subscribe wherever you happen to listen or watch the podcast. And of course, support us directly on Patreon at patreon.com/AIInsideShow. We offer ad-free shows, early access to videos, Discord community, regular hangouts with me and Jeff and the rest of the community, and a whole lot more. And speaking of the community, we also give you the opportunity to give it a certain level that makes you an executive producer of this show, so you can have your name read out at the end with a whole lot of fireworks and flair like Dr. Do and Jeffrey Maricini. Thank you so much for your extended support of AI Inside. We literally could not do this show without you all. Thank you again for watching and listening each and every week. We'll see you next time on another episode of AI Inside. Bye, everybody.